So hello Isabella, welcome in Pimprenelle. I'm very pleased to have you. So I'm going to briefly introduce you. So you're a master's student in the University of Oxford doing a master degree in international and comparative education. You also graduated from West Point University in international history and systems engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And you are also a second lieutenant in the US Army. But before we delve into that, I want to ask you questions about you as a student and your experience with schooling. So, could you please tell us about your educational journey? What type of students were you, and did you enjoy school?
Yes. Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Um, yeah. So I went to a K through 12 institution starting in second grade. Before that, I was at a private Catholic school. In my K through 12 school, it was secular, really small classes. It was in San Antonio, Texas. I went to like a very, very diverse school. Like growing up, most of my friends I had friends that were like from China, from Taiwan, like quite a few Asian friends. But my school was just so diverse. People that were Hispanic, not a lot of other black students, except for me and my friend. But it was really diverse. We had really small classes, and I loved school growing up. Um, I thought I kind of lived in a bit of a bubble where I thought everywhere and that I was going to go to was going to be just as diverse and just as accepting. Like it was very common. Most people spoke at least, two languages. People had different faith. A lot of people's politics were very common. Like we shared a lot of political beliefs, I think, because we grew up together and that was different than our parents. And so I kind of like grew up in a bit of a bubble. It was really positive and it taught me to appreciate other cultures, but very different than what I've experienced since then. So I graduated in 2020 from high school, and then I went to West Point, which is a military academy. It's one of a few in the U.S. and it produces Army officers. So there, I played Division I volleyball. I studied history and engineering, like you said, and also at the same time, like was being taught how to be a leader, how I was going to be as an officer. So we were like measured there in terms of we had a physical grade, a military grade, and an academic grade, and then we also had a ton of character education. So that education was very unique in that I was assessed in three different pillars, but taught in like four different pillars, I would say. So yeah, that was my last 4 years. And then I got to Oxford. I had the opportunity, I commissioned this past May. So I'm an active duty officer, but I had the opportunity to come and study my first 2 years at Oxford. And then, yeah, now I'm in the education program with you.
And so, were your parents like throughout your education, especially K through 12, able to like support you with homeworks? And like, I mean, were they educated?
Yeah, so my parents were both Army officers. My dad went to the same school that I did for college, so West Point, and my mom, um, she's a certified nurse midwife, so she went to Xavier University in the States and then went and got her extra schooling for nursing. So my parents very educated. I lived a very privileged lifestyle socioeconomically. My parents supported me a lot, and if they couldn't, then I had a couple tutors most of my education. I think starting in like fifth or sixth grade, I had a math tutor. Up until 12th grade, I was enrolled in like guitar lessons, violin lessons. Like I kind of had a very, um, what's the word? Like I was exposed to a lot of different things and I was
Mm-hmm.
very privileged and blessed in that sense. But yeah, my parents are very, my mother's Korean and my dad's black. So culturally a bit different, but they raised us to be like my sister and I, to be very self sufficient. So they were very hands off. But my school really taught me how to be independent and self sufficient. Like in fifth grade, we had to use an agenda, which most like 11-year-olds aren't using an agenda, or
Mm-hmm.
12, however old I was. And my parents like never really checked my homework. They just kind of trusted I was doing it, which worked. And I had a lot of support at school. Like I do think my parents raised me, but the school I went to
Mm.
really raised me too.
That's yeah, that's very amazing. And so, when did applying to West Point like become an objective for you?
So I wanted to play college volleyball, which since having like moved to the UK and just being in Europe, like athletics are very different here. It's not as big of a deal. But yeah, athletics were a huge part of my life growing up. I knew I wanted to play volleyball like at the highest level I could, but my parents were really pushing me. And in hindsight, I'm so glad they did because I didn't have this perspective when I was 16. They were like, sure, yes, we support you playing college volleyball, but you need to go to a really good university as well. So that kind of limited my search. Like very few schools in the country have strong athletics and strong academics, like, Stanford, UT, those are some examples. But so it kind of limited to the East Coast, like Ivy Leagues. That I knew that's where I was looking. And then, yeah, the West Point coach recruited me. I was like, sure, I'll give it a try. Like I knew a little bit from my dad, but it was very new to me. He didn't push me to go to West Point. And yeah, so I didn't have any aspirations of being in the military. I honestly didn't think it was going to be a good fit. A lot of my friends at home were like, you're going to the military. But it worked out really well and I did well there.
Did you had like expectations before integrating like West Point?
Yes. Yeah, I think I don't know. My dad was there in the 90s. He was there 92 to 96. And he had a good experience. Like overall, I know he's very grateful he went, and I don't want to speak too much for him, but he had quite a few poor experiences with like racism and discrimination there. And, I accepted unofficially, with the coach that I was going to go to West Point my junior year. I went through the application senior year, I got in, and he didn't even tell me about this stuff until I was going to start in July, and he told me in like June, so he didn't say anything because he really didn't want to influence my decision. And so yeah, then like that right before that was, George Floyd happened, I think May 25th, 2020. And I just got very anxious to like leave home. It didn't really have anything to do with West Point. I knew that I was going to like a very different school than what I was used to, but I was just like nervous to leave my dad. I had a lot of anxiety about like what was going on. And then, my dad kind of sat me down and told me about some of his experiences at that time. I don't want to say that it was official policy or if it was unofficial, but like two black cadets couldn't be roomed together, and it was like in the 90s. So he kind of told me about that stuff, and that's when I knew that it was like 20 years ago or almost 30, but I was starting to get a little nervous. But yeah, I honestly, I think I was just really naive and young. Like I grew up with so much diversity. I figured West Point was going to be very diverse, and it was. It's obviously predominantly male and predominantly, white people. But I knew it was going to be somewhat diverse. I wasn't expecting how male dominated it was going to be because in my class growing up at Keystone, it was so like women are powerful. The women were like much more, I would say, the ambitious people in our class. And we just had we outnumbered all the guys. So yeah, I guess to answer your question in a roundabout way, I didn't have a ton of like strong convictions or ideas of what I was getting into. So I was very surprised in the first couple years at West Point.
And where is West Point comparing to Texas? Like in which state it is?
It's in New York.
Okay.
So it's about like an hour outside of the city.
Okay.
So it's pretty isolated. It's on the Hudson, but it's really easy to get to the city, but it's kind of its own bubble. Like there's a town around it. There's a couple smaller towns nearby, but yeah, it's a pretty, I would say, tight-knit community.
And so I feel it's interesting since your father also attended like West Point. So from your experience, like, and especially like what he said about his own experience, like I guess there were like differences, right? Especially in regard to like racism and everything. Like, did you feel it got better comparing it to his experience?
Yeah, I think I was asked a couple of times in my later years at West Point. I don't know if it was like for a survey or something, but I was asked like if I had experienced racism, and I can't think of like key moments where I felt like I was being discriminated against. If anything, I thought at West Point, I think it's a bit different right now, but when I was there from 2020 to 2024, I had like pretty amazing professors that empowered me to explore race. And I think it was really important because I got to West Point really disoriented about George Floyd, truthfully, like very disoriented about what service to our country would look like. Like I hadn't really thought about it, and all of a sudden I had to think about it, and it was in the height of a ton of tension. And so I just like really wanted to explore that intellectually, like what's been the history of race in the U.S. Army, what's been the history of women, that kind of thing. And I had a couple of key professors my first year. I don't want to name them for their privacy reasons, but they really kind of just empowered me to figure out like what does it mean for me to be a black woman in the military? Like how can I still feel empowered to serve a country that's experiencing so much turmoil? How can I still like what does service really mean to me? And so yeah, I can't my senior going into my senior year I had a couple of bad experiences in multiple senses, but overall I had a really good experience like with the professors there. Like I felt very supported in a time where I was like 18. I feel like you're just such a baby when you go to university.
That's true.
But I felt like very supported.
Okay, and so what does it mean to like serve for you now? Like,
Oh my gosh, I haven't been asked that
because you
in
mentioned
so
it, the
long.
question, I was like, yeah, that's so interesting. What does it mean to you actually?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, when I was at West Point, I would have had like an immediate answer, but I think to me, like, I think it's a really cool opportunity to be given like a platform in the U.S. Army to where like you have a voice and you can do better. And I don't know, I guess what service means to me, it's like I've been given an opportunity to be like a role model to others, and I want to do like the best I can, like to do well by them, I suppose. And I do think, you know, it's hard right now. There's just so much going on, but I do think, you know, the United States is an amazing place to be, and I do think it's, you know, an emblem of freedom and of hope, and it has been a safe haven for so many people for so long. And so I think it's really cool to be able to give back to a country that has historically tried to give to others. And yeah, when I was at West Point, I just loved, by the time I was a junior and a senior, I really felt that I was like a role model for different people. I had, you know, people telling me that. I could just, you know, kind of perceive that in the relationships I was building. But the opportunity to like to mentor people either by being just a role model from afar or to mentor people as they go through a similar journey that you've been on, I think it's just a really cool opportunity that, you know, only the Army can give you, or the military.
Yeah. As you mentioned it, that like you like being a role model. Like, what do you like to inspire to other?
Um, wow, these are good questions. I think, I mean, there's so many different traits that I hope to inspire in people. I think gratitude is a really big one. Just teaching people to be grateful for every, you know, my faith is very important to me. So there's a bit of like a faith aspect to it too, to be grateful for all the trials and tribulations that God has presented to you. But I just want to inspire people to be like grateful for every opportunity they have, every challenge they experience. I hope to inspire people to be selfless. Like I think you're the best version of yourself when you're taking care of and looking out for others. And yeah, just I want to inspire people to be curious, to be open to new experiences, to like seek knowledge in whatever form that may be. Yeah, I think those are like some of the things that are really important for me to like be a role model of.
And if there's like anyone listening to us who would like to apply to West Point or join West Point, like what advice would you have for them?
I think, you know, I did so much like recruiting stuff. So I was on the volleyball team. I was captain of the team my last 2 years. So I did a ton of recruiting stuff with the volleyball team and just helped out West Point a little bit too. And so I got to like have so many of these conversations with people that were considering it. And I would always just tell people like, if you're a little bit unsure, just do it. I mean, it's a huge change. Like I think the military academies and even West Point is different from the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy. I think they're all huge risks, but they have great rewards. And it's really scary to do something very different than your peers. But I think if you like want to challenge yourself and you want to see what you're capable of, like West Point doesn't put out the same, 1,100 officers every single year. I think it really challenges people to rise and meet their full potential and want to be better. So whatever that looks like for them, I think it gives them the opportunity to do that. Whether they do it is up to them. But I would just tell them that, like, if you're nervous or if you're unsure, just do it. There's no problem with trying something out. And I think, we talk about higher education a lot. There's kind of this idea, like, I think a little bit in the US that when you go to college, you have to have it all figured out. Like, you have to know what school you want to be in, what do you want to study, like, have a tentative career plan. And I think West Point's cool because you can just go try it out for a year, 6 months, however long you want to be there out of the 4. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. But you get to like explore yourself intellectually, spiritually, physically. So it's just an all around like unique challenge, I would say.
Because I remember you told me that basically it's required to do a scientific path like in undergrad, but you can also like choose another major. So you chose like international history, right? So why did you choose like international history?
So I knew I wanted to, coming off of that summer when I was really conflicted, I knew I wanted to study people, but I was like torn between kind of like a psychology route or history or even sociology. Like, I think I would have really enjoyed sociology, but I didn't know a lot about it. And I think if you don't know a lot about it, sociology can seem like this like this illegitimate discipline, but it's very legit. Now, 5 years later, I realized that. So it was really between like international history and psychology, and I just kind of realized that, I don't know, I love studying like bigger cultures, like how do cultures interact, how do cultures shape people, which sounds very sociology now that I say it, but I felt like history gave that to me in trying to understand how people of the past have done it, and I thought psychology was a bit more individualistic. So yeah, I did history. Loved that experience. I think I'm probably done with history. Like, it was a lot of reading and writing. It pushed me to be a better writer, which I'm grateful for. But yeah, that's kind of how I picked history. And then we have to do an engineering sequence because we graduate with the Bachelor of Science. So pick systems engineering. I could totally see myself doing something like systems engineering or organizational psychology in the future. But yeah, because we took that class with Alia last term and I loved it. Like, I thought it was just a cool way to approach education and just kind of the world. So yeah, that's how I picked my majors.
And when I hear you, I can notice that like you really enjoyed, like, whether it's K through 12 or even your undergrad. What do you think made the difference? I'm asking that because like I know that in France, like, we're often very disappointed or like, very critical regarding our education. But when I'm in the US and when I talk to American people, I notice that usually they enjoyed school. And so what do you think is the reason why, like, maybe not for all of the American people, but at least in your experience, like, what is the reason why you enjoyed so much, like, K through 12 undergrad? Like,
I think, I think for all of those experiences, like obviously my peers shaped it, but they were very different in K through 12 versus undergrad. But like, I had very good professors. I think when I hit high school and I started to like get a little bit more autonomy in the classes, I think we've talked about that, like how much autonomy you get in the classes you take and the kind of education you receive. My school, at least, and it was a private school, so it's very different than public schools, I think. I just, the teachers I had made me, first of all, like, I fell in love with history. I despised history up until 8th grade. And then I had these really amazing professors, Dr. Caraway, Dr. Armstrong, Mr. Spedding, my senior year, or my high school years. And they just kind of like made me fall in love with it. And so I thought it was really cool that I had people take something that I despised in 8th grade and something that I ended up pursuing in undergrad. So I think my professors were really amazing all around. My English professors, my language professors, and then I got to undergrad and then same thing, like I had a very supportive community. I think I've talked to some people, but mentorship is a really big thing at West Point. I don't think it's a thing in even other American universities or international schools or like other cultures. But you know, West Point really encourages you to have mentors. So I like would have these professors that I just click with, and I'd reach out and be like, you know, could we meet? Could we discuss a couple things? And these are just people, I can think of a few off the top of my head that just kind of like walked me through my entire experience. Like if I needed to go to their house to like decompress, they were there. If I needed guidance on like a leadership challenge I was having, they were there. Like there's a few key people, Colonel Drohan, Colonel Schnack, Colonel Tillman, that Major Saul like totally just walked me through my entire experience. So I think it was really the professors. Like I've been very lucky to have amazing supportive professors.
That's amazing. It's also definitely something that we don't have in France, like this culture of like mentorship. Do you think that like in K through 12 and also in West Point, that your professor were also showing who they are like as person, like giving like their personality into their ways of like teaching, or was it just like delivering content?
Yeah, I think my professors were all like very, very personally engaged. Kind of like they were all very invested in our success, I would say. And I had that. I think that's the beauty of going to. You talked about how you went to a smaller private university for undergrad. Like I think when you go to these schools where there's like the student population is smaller, people like the professors just have the bandwidth to be more invested in you. Obviously, that's not an option for everyone, but yeah, I don't know how people get the same kind of education in these massive classrooms. Like
Yeah.
you know, we have this thing called additional instruction at West Point, and so I went to like, it's called AI. I went to AI all the time, and it's like where teachers set aside, it's like office hours basically, but they set aside time for you to like come in, you know, be retaught the material. They'll engage with it in a different way that helps you, talk about your essays with you. Like, I think having teachers that really are invested in your success is really important. So even if they, you know, they give the same lecture 3 times a day because it's a general requirement, like your opportunity to go in and engage with them separately, and they're super willing and eager to do so, I think that kind of makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. And so now let's talk a little bit more about like being a woman in a male-dominated place. So I've read that there's only like 16% of women in the U.S. Army. So how does it feel?
Yeah, so at West Point, I think my class was 24% women. So we had a few more people. But yeah, this is so crazy. I like never really noticed it my first 3.5 years because I was on, you know, the women's volleyball team. So my life was like consumed by them. I mean, even if you're an athlete at West Point, everyone has the same morning schedule, morning and until like early afternoon, but we all get up, we all go to formation, mandatory breakfast, we all go to classes, mandatory lunch. But I would eat 3 meals a day with my teammates, and then in the afternoon I was with them from like 2:30 to 7:30, like because you walk to practice together, you get ready, you practice, you do dinner together, you study together. So I was like just constantly surrounded by women.
Okay.
And then when I wasn't, I totally noticed it. And I think also like I had like leadership roles before then, but my first really meaningful leadership role, meaningful in that like I really tried to rise to the occasion and take it very seriously, was when I became a team captain end of my sophomore year, so like May 2022, and I was very young, like only a few people are team captains that third year of school. It's mostly your fourth year. And yeah, I was like leading a team with a co-captain of just all women, which is really unique. Like one, I'll never do that again in the Army or in the civilian workforce. And it really required different things. Like I thought I had to be much more, like I think I just had to lead differently than I would have if it was a mostly like a male dominated space, or even like more men mixed in. But I think like leading a team of all women was really challenging but very unique. And so then that summer going into my senior year, I had a big leadership role that summer, I was in charge of like welcoming the class of 2027 into West Point. So there's like a basic training when you start. And so I was in charge of that. So we had like 1,250 new cadets, 250 cadre, and I was like the person in charge of it all, the cadet. Um, and that was the first time I was not leading like a female dominated team. And it was, in fact, I'm trying to think of the numbers, but it was the smaller team. I was in charge of like 1,500 people, but really like the people that I worked with is like 7 or 8, and it kind of like delegates down. And that was a male dominated space, and it was like really hard. I mean, that's kind of an understatement, and I've only talked with very few people about this, but some of the guys that I was leading, I could tell. I mean, there were so many things there, but like they were struggling to respect me. You could diagnose it however you want, but they didn't respect me very publicly. And I was all like, you're young, and this is supposed to be a huge challenge. Like, I'm one of very few people that's leading this amount, like this number of cadets, like at this wide of a scale or large of a scale. And so it's supposed to be hard, but like I had these couple of men that really didn't respect me, made it very public. And they clearly respected, I had a counterpart. They clearly respected like my male counterpart a lot more and would only really take instruction from him. They were very subversive publicly. And yeah, and then even before that detail, and that's just about being a woman, like before that detail, and I know we said we wouldn't talk about it too much with like race, but there was just a lot of murmurings about like why did I even earn that role? Like, was it just because I was a Black woman? And I would hear about them, and yeah, like that was so I kind of already had that like niggling in the back of my mind. So I wouldn't say my confidence was shaky, but I was already trying to like overcome something that I thought was there, whether or not it was like widespread, but I felt like it was there. And then like the detail starts, and I have these couple of guys that are just so subversive, and it was so lonely because like, it's kind of cliche, but everyone's like, oh, it's lonely at the top. And I was only at the top for like a couple of months, but like felt like I had no one to turn to, and no one like could really understand what I was going through, because like sometimes when people are subversive like that, even if it's so public, you almost feel like people don't believe you when you say it. And I was like, no, like this is a problem. Like these people aren't listening to me. Like they're disrespecting me. And yeah, so that was really hard. And then, there was a positive end result. Like there were several conversations. It was the first time I kind of ever had to like have very uncomfortable conversations about my gender and how that informs how people see me and respect me. But we had we had facilitated conversations. I had private conversations with those individuals, and it got better. But it was like kind of a slap in the face. Like I wasn't expecting it. And then that year, I was, this is like, it's kind of all a made up structure, but it feels very real in the moment. And it is real. Like you have these responsibilities, and more is asked of certain cadets that they feel that the institution feels like can handle more and can be a leader. Like how much you're leading, I don't know, but you're kind of representative, and you're like a face of the institution. So my senior year, I was number 2 in the whole chain of command. So there's like 4,500 cadets. There's one person at the top. He's our first captain. He's actually here, and we have a really good relationship. And I was number 2, like his deputy. And I was on a male-dominated staff. And yeah, that was a really hard experience. Like it was hard when I was on the volleyball team, and then I finished volleyball that December because it was my senior year, and I wasn't around in that female space anymore, and it became like even harder that last semester I was at school. So yeah, I think that was a really long answer to your question, but my last like year and a half, I had a couple of experiences that were like very informed by my gender. And I'm grateful I wouldn't take it back. But I think, like I said, in high school, I lived in a bubble where like women kind of ruled our class, like numbers wise and personality wise. And then I lived in a bubble. Even in at the US Military Academy, I was surrounded by women. And then that end of junior, going into an all of senior year, like the bubble like totally popped. And I can look back now and like, recount it with a smile on my face, but I was like totally struggling that year. And it's so hard. Like, I luckily had some really amazing male mentors that walked me through it, surprisingly. And I had a couple of really strong female mentors, but only so many people like really understand what it's like. And it feels like you're being crazy because it's so subtle sometimes, the way that people, just cut you out of a conversation or don't invite you to certain things or that kind of thing. But when it amounts to something very substantial at the end of the day.
And I feel also from what you're saying, what seems to be complicated is like because you have an important role and you were given the chance to like be a leader, admitting that something is not going well might be a pressure also for you because you don't want to like show some weakness maybe in your role, but you're struggling. And so, but did you feel they were like welcoming this, like when you talk to like mentors and reach out to them, like were they helpful?
I mean, a lot of my mentors, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, but a lot of my mentors have been in the Army for, I'm trying to think, at least 12, if not closer to like 30 years. So they've been in the Army for a long time. So it's a very different Army from when they started. And I think they've seen, regardless of the time change, they've just seen so many different situations. So when I'm talking to people that are much older, I think they got it. But it was really hard to talk to like confront those peers that are my same age, about how I kind of felt like, whether they intended to or not, I don't want to speak for them, like how I felt like they were discriminating against me because I was a woman. And they weren't calling me like awful names or anything like that, but just simply not including me or treating me very differently. And I think that's just hard. I think that's something that the Army's trying to figure out right now is how do you include not only women, but how do you include people that are qualified and talented that deserve to be there in these spaces where they traditionally haven't been? And how do you do it while like preserving a culture if it's healthy? Like how do you preserve the culture, include these new people that are very different? And so that's kind of where I was.
So I also had a question in my mind. I mean, I know that in the West we had like a very patriarchal like culture, and so sexism is everywhere. But do you think that in the Army, like sexism manifests itself like differently than like in society? Or do you think, is there like a sort of culture within the Army of sexism that might be different than the one we have in society?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. And it's maybe because I'm only, 22, but it's hard for like I've grown up in like very unique spaces. Like I feel like I haven't until this year at Oxford almost like seen society because I grew up in this very small bubble in San Antonio, Texas. Like I was exposed to people through like extracurriculars, but like my school really raised me, and it was very unique. And then I went to a very unique undergrad institution. So I feel like I don't have a strong understanding until I got to Oxford and got to see like a civilian society. As a much more mature woman and, hear from people in our class and our cohort, their experiences. But I don't really have like a frame of reference to compare it to. I think nowadays, just discrimination in general, but sexism, I think people expect it to be overt, like calling someone something discriminatory, explicitly telling someone you don't get this job because you are a woman and I don't think women are qualified. Like people don't say that stuff anymore. Whether or not they think it, I don't know, but they don't say it. I just think like sometimes sexism happens in much more covert, subtle ways. And it's in ways that maybe like these men, or not just men, anyone can be sexist, but these people don't even realize. Like I think people tend to have these preconceived notion or these, you know, subconscious biases, and it manifests in their behavior. And I don't think it's, you know, I would say this like all the time when I was talking about this my senior year, like I'm not like looking at these, for me in my experience it was men, like I wasn't looking at these men and like villainizing them. Was I very frustrated in the moment? Yes, but I was like, you know, it's very likely and probable that they're acting in a way that they don't even realize. Like maybe they have this subconscious bias against women, and maybe they just, the view of what they like, their view of what a strong leader looks like doesn't look like me. Like that whole detail, that whole summer, I was trying to figure out how I wanted to be as a leader, and I was just like very reserved. Like I didn't say a lot. Like I like to think that I had a strong presence, but I wasn't the loudest in the room. I physically wasn't the largest. And I felt like maybe these men were struggling to respect me because what their view of a strong leader was completely different than what they had in front of them. Like it wasn't someone that was physically very large and imposing. It wasn't someone that was super loud. It was a woman. She looked a certain way. Like I really care about being feminine, so I'm always gonna have my nails painted, and I'm always gonna have like my earrings in regulation in. And so yeah, I think that's what, at least in the military, that's been my experience. Is it's people that maybe feel a certain way about like women or other people, and they don't even realize it. And so I try my best. Like it was really hard in those situations to like, hey, like, if I'm not going to confront them about it, like I don't need to make assumptions about what they believe. Like, can I make factual statements about how they are treating me and how it's making me feel? Yes, but I try my best to not be like, they're sexist people versus I'm feeling like I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman. I think those are very like different statements. So trying to just be like patient with people. You know, I have biases that I don't realize too against all kinds of people. But yeah, that's kind of my view on like what sexism looks like nowadays.
That's very mature from you. Like very, very
It
mature.
took me like forever to get there.
Yeah, I guess. I know you touched a little bit on that already, but like regarding the men in the army, did you feel that there is this sort of like toxic masculinity that is really prevalent, like between themselves, maybe from what you've heard from your male friends there, or?
Yeah. I don't know. It's so hard like to speak on that because yeah, I think how guys perceive it and how like men and women perceive it is very different. I've been with the same guy for almost 4 years now. 3.5 years, and he was also at West Point, and so he's kind of the person that would, you know, give me this perspective that I didn't have, like when I was struggling that year, when I have these questions about masculinity, like he gives me some much appreciated perspective. But yeah, I think just from what I've seen, and we've talked about it, something that like I've noticed the most that I can speak on is that I think the idea of success in the military has been almost like masculinized. And we've talked about that a little bit in class. You actually kind of like brought this up, and I did like a ton of thinking on it. But like for me as a woman to try to envision what success looks like for me in the military, it's very difficult because success in the military and the army, I think it's pretty narrow. Like you do well professionally, and that's kind of it. Like there's no conversation of like what success looks like in your personal life. Maybe like I would say a lot of people I know are very religious or spiritual in the military, so maybe that's like sprinkled in there, but successful is like very one-dimensional, and it doesn't feel, and it feels a bit masculinized in the sense that I'm like, okay, as a woman, let's say I have these ambitions, like I want to be very successful career-wise and professionally, but I also want to be a really good wife and mother. Like how do I do that in the military? And there's like biological factors that I have to consider that like no one, I talk about this all the time, like no one at West Point, you know, a couple female mentors maybe, but like no one at West Point prepared me for that. Like how do I factor this other view of success into like planning out my military career? And, we talked about like what it means for like feminism to be masculinized. Like, so if I want to be successful in this very professional sense, like, or a woman wants to be successful in this professional sense, like, what does it mean for her partner to be successful? Like, is he still just successful if it's a traditional male and female relationship? Like, is he still just successful professionally, and then she has all these other responsibilities as well? So yes, we talked about that a couple weeks ago, and I brought that up to like my boyfriend. I just think it's so interesting, like this recent wave of feminism. I think expects women to like kind of do it all. Like
Yeah.
you're like I'm a part of. I subscribe to like modern day feminism, so I want to be a successful career woman. I want to be successful outside of the house, but I also have to be successful like in the home. Not even have to, like if I want to, like how
Yeah.
do you basically do it all? So yeah.
Yeah, that's so relevant. I see what you mean. I think it's very complicated because for a long time, and especially like the white bourgeois feminism, were very like, oh, emancipation for women equals like having what men have. So it's like not really trying to find new ways for women and unique ways for women to how they can success, but it's more like, oh, if they want to success, then success is already defined by what men have been doing, so it's this. And I feel that right now we're very in a wave of like trying to redefine what it means for us to be successful in a way that is not like comparable to what men are doing. Complicated to be like, do you want to be a good mother? And sometimes in feminism it can be seen like oh, she wants to be a mother, then she doesn't care about her career, like she's not very ambitious, and you can be very looked down upon for that.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a lot of like I'm pretty sure it has a name in feminism, but like of shaming towards women who really adore like being in the household and everything. And I think it's not the right way of like seeing feminism, but yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think like many women, especially our age, struggle with that, like between like our career and aspirations and between our desire to be a mother and to be a wife and everything. And I don't think it should be incompatible, like definitely not. But then how do we merge the two, and can we be like on the top of those two? And as you said, there's also like biological factors, like as women we cannot have like children when we're going to be 40 years old, or like maybe 40 but like not 50, at some point it ends. So it's definitely a lot of pressure. And I was interested also to know, because you mentioned the fact that you did a lot of like athleticism, so with volleyball and everything. Is it mandatory to be an athlete when you're at West Point?
At some level, there's like different levels, so everyone has to do a sport.
Okay.
If it's just like you compete within the school, or you compete within like the larger NCAA association of athletics, like that varies, but everyone does some sort of athletics.
And so do you feel that like because again biologically like women and men are different, so do you feel that as a woman you have to do like much than men in terms of like athleticism just to be able to feel legitimate?
I don't think so, honestly. I mean, we have the only time we're kind of put in the same situation as men. I mean, all of our training is co-ed. Like we don't ever do any training with just women or just men. So I think like in the summer when I would do all that training, I don't know, like the men that, I had a couple of one-off experiences where I felt like I felt like I was kind of held to this standard of like I needed to work even harder. But overall, I think for me personally, as someone that prides myself on being very physically fit and wanting to push myself, like I just enjoy being athletic or doing athletic things. And so for me personally, like I always felt like I had the respect of my male peers, not because I was stronger than them or even comparable. Like there are biological differences. My boyfriend and I work out very similarly, but he is significantly stronger than me. It's not even really a competition between us, but I do feel like because of like my attitude and my just desired to be there and to support the team physically, the team being whatever unit I was in, as best I could. I always felt like I had people's respect. And I think that's something that, I don't know if it's a misconception in the Army or at the university I went to, but I don't know if like, I can't speak for all men, but I don't know if like men or women there expect everything to be equal output. Like I am not gonna lift the same amount of weight. Me personally, there are very strong women out there. I'm not gonna lift the same amount of weight as half the guys that I'm around probably. But so I don't think that's the expectation. I think it's that like you put in the effort and you have the right attitude. And so we talked about that a lot, like, and I still struggle to wrap my head around like equity, equality. But sometimes someone can put in, especially when it comes to physical stuff with men and women, like sometimes you can put in the exact same amount and you may just biologically get different outputs. But I think it's the input in that sense that's what matters, and that's what should command respect. And I do think that I had a positive experience with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you feel that regarding the experiences that you had and you just shared, do you feel that there's anything that the Army could have done in order to change a little bit the mentality of like the male that were not really acting, that were not acting in the right way with you?
Honestly, I don't think there's anything the institution could have done better. I think and they were very impactful experiences, but they were also like one-off in the sense that they were very unique to me and the people that I was working with. Like I interacted with mostly men at West Point, and overall, like overwhelmingly, it was a very positive experience. So I don't know if there's anything the institution could have done. I think it's like a personal responsibility to understand that if you are in a space that looks different than the way you imagined it, either you're the majority, you're the minority, in whatever way, your physical appearance, your ethnicity, your religion, like whatever way, like if you're in a space that's different than what you imagined, it's your responsibility to be thoughtful about being in that space and to consider to just be very critical, and not critical in a negative sense, but to like have a critical eye in how you are acting in that space, how other people are acting, how you and others in the larger group can be successful in whatever needs to happen in that space. So yeah, I thought when I was there, West Point did a very good job with trying to get us to engage in those conversations. Like are there things that I thought at the time could have been better? Maybe, but like I was always pushed to have conversations with my peers and my classmates and my professors about things that needed to, about things that should have been conversed on, like difficult topics, whatever they may be. And so I think that's just like a personal responsibility thing, honestly. That's what I would say. But do we teach people? But like then the question becomes like, how do you teach people to like have that personal responsibility and that self-awareness?
Yeah.
That's really difficult, I think.
I feel maybe it's something that has to do with like K through 12 education.
Yeah, I think that probably comes from the home, the way they were brought up. Like I think it's very hard when you're 18 to teach someone.
And also probably society in general, because we often say that like schools is like a microscope of like society. So there's injustices and like not in everywhere, like in schools and. But yeah, I feel it's important to address that things, and I feel like from what you said, like West Point did a good job in like supporting you, like through. Your peers did a good job. Also, you talked a lot about your leadership roles, and I feel that it impacted you and inspired you a lot. So how being a leader transformed you, and what did you learn from this role?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I learned something new every day in all the different jobs I was in. I learned so many different things. I think the way it transformed me is I gained a lot of confidence, I would say. Confidence that I maybe didn't have before, because there was like, I wasn't thinking critically about that stuff and nothing had tested me. And so I think I gained confidence, and I think the most important part of leadership is just getting experience. Like it's putting yourself in situations where like I had previously led all women, and then I was leading and working with mostly men. Like I needed to be put in that space to understand the difference and to learn and to grow. And so I think I just have a much better understanding of like people. You know, there's a lot of different things. I don't know. I must have done an application recently where I wrote about it, but like something about something I would go back and change maybe. And I think having been at Oxford and being around people that aren't from the military or don't have a military background, like I see that there are such stark differences between people, military professionals and civilians. And so like moments where I think there's, you know, quite a few moments where I felt like I could have done better on the volleyball team, you know, in my two leadership positions that I had junior and senior year in the Corps. Like, I think I just understand the nuance and complexity a bit better having been at Oxford, that like just because the military has instilled me with, I think, very positive values that I hope to replicate and I hope to take with me as I lead in other places. That doesn't mean I need to have like such a blanket approach. And I don't think I had an always blanket approach, but I do think I didn't understand like the nuance and complexity of like leading the women on the volleyball team. They were so many different ages and so many different personalities. And we were like all united in that we were on the volleyball team. We went to West Point, but there was just so much diversity of of personas there that I wish I had approached that with a bit more nuance. But I think overall, like West Point taught me like a lot about resilience and grit. Like that's kind of an Army buzzword, but I do think it taught me that just like in the day in and day out experiences, how to work with people, how to be personable, like how to public speak. I got a lot of practical skills from that.
And you mentioned it that you saw a lot of differences between like civilians and people at West Point. What are those?
I think West Point, like there was diversity there in the sense that like people's personalities were different, but you don't realize like being in an institution where you are inculcated to share the same values. Like not everyone, me and even like my best friends from West Point, like we're not the exact same, but there is like we do value like responsibility and service. We value like integrity and honesty. Just all these things, like even if you're different, like people, like if you're raised in a very formative time in your life from 18 to 22 or however old you are in undergrad to like value the same things, like I didn't realize how much that really bonds us. Like me and some of my best friends from West Point, we're so different, but like the same things in people will kind of frustrate us, or the same situations will frustrate us because we at the baseline were inculcated in a very similar manner. And then here, oh my gosh, like even our cohort like kind of surprised me the first day. Everyone is so different. Like there is, I don't think there is any sort of like, I would say like shared, other than like a love for learning, there's not many shared values across all how 16, 14 people in our cohort. Like we're so different. I thought West Point was different, but like we are so different. So I think that's the biggest thing. And just trying to be, I'm pretty resolute in a lot of my convictions. You know, sometimes like my mom and people will say that's me being inflexible, but I'd like to say that I'm resolute. And so I think just being here has taught me to be just like a bit more understanding of people's different backgrounds. I think I've always prided myself on understanding that people come from different places, and it really shapes how they are as individuals. But now that I'm exposed to like so many different types of people, it's just really pushed me to be patient, to try my best to be understanding. And hopefully when I go back to the Army, which I am excited about, like I have an even stronger understanding of people, and that'll let me be a better leader. That's kind of what I hope.
That's so interesting. I mean, I can, because I never experienced like something as you just shared, like in the army, having shared values and everything. And even in France, in schools, like we have like a freedom, equality, and humanhood makes no sense, but like not sisterhood or like brotherhood, but like,
Yeah.
family kind of in general. But it's never really concrete,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that from your experience and hearing you, it seems that it was very concrete and you can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially since you're comparing it to Oxford. But then it leads me to the question, like, can you see these differences in education, I guess, in people's action or more in their ways of thinking? Is it more something that you see in the way they behave, or is it more like the way they answer, or because values can manifest like either in actions but also like
Totally.
in how you develop and argue and everything?
I think they manifest in like every way you just say. I think um, people's values really shape like how they view the world, how they view their relationships, and so how they act accordingly. Um, like I just a one-off example, really value like loyalty, like really
Mm.
value that, and so that really will shape kind of like my social life. It'll shape the way I approach relationships. Um, and so yeah, I think, and that's kind of like what I was really interested when I got to West Point. Not that that interest has waned, but it's kind of just taken a different shape. I've always been so fascinated by like how culture informs behavior,
Mm-hmm.
culture as in like your ethnicity, but also maybe like your social environment, and how you were raised and
Mm-hmm.
how whatever social environment you're in the moment. I think like culture is one of the biggest, I don't want to say predictors, but it is like one of the biggest factors that informs people. And I feel like we just don't talk about it enough. Like we
Mm-hmm.
kind of view people in this very, insular isn't the word, but like we view people as if they're almost in a vacuum. And it's like, no, someone is acting this way for a reason. And you don't always have time to, psychoanalyze somebody or be
Mm-hmm.
really like thoughtful. But like when you do have the time, I think it is worth giving that, like that thought has a lot of merit. And
I
trying to
agree.
understand, I think if you take the time to understand why the people around you are the way you are, like not only does it lead to deeper relationships, but
Mm-hmm.
I just think it gives you like a better understanding.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, based on what you just said, like I feel the more you understand and you put effort into trying to understand people, the less you judge also, and the less you're like,
Yes.
oh, this person is bad and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's very valuable to have this mindset and very important. So coming to the end, but not yet. So I have a question, because you know that in France, like higher education is totally free. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, free higher ed and K through 12 too. And it's a striking difference with the US, where the US like undergrad education is very expensive. So according to you, although I kind of see like the positive and negative, but according to you, what are the positive and negatives like aspect of having a expensive higher education?
Yeah, I think I've actually been trying to understand this. Like, I think I'm like lacking a deeper understanding of like the economy because I
Mm.
can't even fathom free education. Like that's just so different to me and I'm like,
Mm.
but how are people paid? Like how are professors paid? Like where do people stay? I think
Yeah.
we talked about this maybe in CIE 1, like my
Yeah.
whatever group I was in. I remember we were discussing this one day, but like part of what you're paying for, I think at American universities is like the social character and emotional development almost. Like it does seem like university like the whole university experience in the US is I think it's a lot more than like just school, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't want to speak to France or any other country, but from like what I've gathered from our class is that like university is just really about like your your preparation for the workforce, your academic development, like
Mm-hmm.
intellectual stimulus, that kind of thing. But I think in the US, like your dorm experience is really, really important. Like the opportunity to be in a sorority or a fraternity, like to be in Greek life. I think there's a lot more kind of like engagements with like your professors, and so I don't know exactly like what the experiences are of other countries, but I think you're kind of like developed very differently at American universities almost. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But like part of the mission of like if you look at the mission statements of a lot of American universities, it's like to develop like maybe to develop democratic citizens, it's to develop leaders, develop people with high character. I haven't looked at other international universities, but like I think you're almost in theory paying for that. I don't know if people really get that experience in American universities, but that's I think what they say you're paying for.
That's no, I remember my university was like about like morality and like building your morality and your own like person and character.
Yeah.
And, no, so it's very interesting, and I think, as you said, it's much more comprehensive in this aspect. Like American education, in my opinion, like higher ed at least, really takes into consideration the personality of the students, whereas in France, it's like we don't care about who you are.
Yeah,
we care about the students that you are, but like the rest is none of our concerns, and we have this very high separation between the public and the private, and the personality is often regarded as something that is private, a little bit like in the Chinese education actually, but it should not come into the room and the class, you know, whereas in the US, I remember like the teacher was asking me like, what do you think about that? I was like, to me it was weird because I was like, they should not care about my opinion. Like, I'm just here to work, you know? But so, yeah, very interesting. Well, my last question, but I feel we kind of also touch upon this a little bit, is like, is there one thing that you would like to change or improve in the US educational system, whether it is K through 12 or your experience at West Point, for instance? What would it be and why?
I just really wish we were able, you know, this is very idealistic and it's not founded upon like any sort of socioeconomic realism, but I just really wish we could like give children a better start. Like just the way that kids are educated, kids being like, I'm talking adolescents, like starting in primary school, you know, pre-K, kindergarten, and so on. Like it's really dependent upon your socioeconomic status. Like that really heavily shapes the quality of education you get. And yeah, in like my ideal world, that's your family's socioeconomic status does not impact the education a 3, 4, or 5-year-old gets. Like it's very idealistic, and I really just want to emphasize that. But I just wish that like all of our 5-year-olds could get a really quality education, and they could all be exposed to, you know, not just the same like intellectual stimulus, but like kind of the same like diverse classrooms, really engaged teachers. Because I think I in high school worked a lot. Like I nannied, I worked at a preschool, I tutored a lot of like, I tutored kids like from kindergarten with like sight words all the way through like 8th grade in history. I think like what you learn at a really young age really shapes not just like who you are as a student, but who you are as a person, and therefore like your success in totality as you become older. So that's kind of like what I would envision.
That makes a lot of sense, and I totally agree with you on that. I think the US system, like education starts at 5 years old, right? Okay. And France it's at
6, 7.
6, 7. Okay.
Yeah, it's much later. It's state dependent, which is a whole other thing, but a lot of states it's 6 or 7. Very few states are 5, and one's 8.
Okay, I see.
It's pretty old. So you don't have to put your kid in pre-K, sometimes not even kindergarten.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, that plays a huge role. Okay, thank you so much, Isabella. It was very interesting, and I've learned a lot about your experience and also about yourself, which I was happy to, because it was very nice and very enriching. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.